La ilaha illa Allah wa Muhammad Rasulullah. Now, I probably didn't pronounce that completely right, but I one time was taking a class and I memorized that just for fun. It is the first pillar of Islam. And I was sitting next to a fellow religion major, and she had recently studied in an Arabic nation for a semester, and she told me, you mispronounced a little bit of it, and she was trying to correct me. And I'm not sure if I ever got the corrections made or if I'm doing it the wrong way, but La ilaha illa Allah wa Muhammad Rasul Allah. And that is the first pillar of Islam. It is the pillar of there is no God but the one God, and Muhammad is his messenger, Muhammad is his prophet. And essentially, the word Allah means one God. That's all that word means. And basically, in order to become a Muslim, you must first proclaim in your heart, or sort of matter of factly, that you actually make the declaration, La ilaha illa Allah. There is no God but the one God. There is no God but Allah. There is no God but the one God. For most people of Jewish Christian traditions, that's probably not a stretch to make a declaration like, I believe there is no God but the one God. I mean, that's part of those religions. And then the second part is, and Muhammad is his prophet. And to a certain degree, I've always said, I could probably accept that. I don't know what a prophet is. I probably don't accept it on the level of what most Muslims do. But I mean, I can accept that, Muhammad is definitely a messenger of God in some regard. Whether or not I personally was raised within a Christian tradition and continue to practice within that tradition. I'm not selling any one religion. I mean, it's part of this class. But that is at least where I come from. But I would still say that to a large degree, Muhammad has been a very influential messenger of bringing the message of God to the people of the world. And so in that regard, to a certain degree, I accept the first pillar of Islam. And so I would in some ways be technically a Muslim. Now, most Muslims would say, well, that's not enough and you need to go beyond that. And I would agree. But that's the first pillar. The idea of Islam is there are 5 pillars. Most of us know about Islam, and we start off with the idea of Islam as a religion that most of us know because we were attacked by people who were Muslims and claimed to be doing acts in the name of Allah, and they were claiming to be jihadists, and we have gone to Afghanistan and Iraq with our militaries, and those are predominantly Muslim nations. And so I think most of us have somewhat of an image of that. Now, I think we have begun to become a little more sophisticated in our understanding, and we understand it a bit more, but at least that's where a lot of us start off with. And one of the things is that I always try to tell people is the faith is much different, and I hope that some of this will also be influential. That some of that will also make a difference. Now, the second thing, I wanted to just run through the 5 pillars of Islam. The first one is that declaration. The second one is you have to pray 5 times a day. Now, the prayer usually. Before you pray, you face towards Mecca. So, for example, in the United States, that's to the east because Mecca is in Saudi Arabia. And so we would face that way. But if you were in Iraq, I guess you would face sort of southward. Or perhaps, I'm not exactly 100% sure where it is because I think it's kind of along the border. But that would be sort of, so it would depend upon where you were in the world, but you would face towards Mecca. And Mecca is essentially the place from which is a place that is significant during the life of Muhammad. And so that he actually, I believe, went there and set up the beginnings of his ministry there. And so that's sort of some importance as part of that in the life of him. So you pray 5 times a day facing that. Now, part of the Muslim prayer is that they call a prayer in Muslim nations over. They call everybody to prayer, and then everybody's supposed to stop what they're doing, face Mecca, and pray. And before they pray, they're actually supposed to go through sort of a ritualistic bathing. You're not supposed to pray if you're not Muslim. And so one of the things that's sort of interesting, when I've been in a mosque, been in a few mosques, but one of the things that's always kind of interesting is there's always a showering area where Muslims can ritualistically wash their ears and their feet and every part of their body. And you wouldn't have to rewash if you had not gotten particularly dirty, if you weren't working hard. But even things like they will say, I mean, if you have flatulence, that would be offensive, and you would need to rewash. And so, that would be part of the process. And so you do this washing. And so one of the things that's kind of interesting when you go into a mosque is that there is a room where people can kind of bathe. And the times I've been there, they've walked us through the shower. The males were allowed to walk through the shower area, and there were old guys in there washing themselves ritualistically. It's kind of it's like walking through a locker room. And so then they go in, and men are in front and women are in back, or sometimes they're in a separate area. And they then, if you go to a mosque, but you can also just pray on the street or in your own home, but the women are in the back. And part of the reason for that is that there's a lot of bending over and prostrating oneself. And so the idea would be for Muslims, it's kind of in some ways a very accurate way of describing is that if women were sitting in front of you and they were bending over, that males would be distracted by that, and so they should be in the back. And they would say it's not sexist, it's just it's just kind of accepting the fact that men would not be able to focus upon their religious faith if women were bending over in front of them. And I mean, there might be some I can definitely see some truth to that. I mean, although most of the time people are wearing, they're not they're still pretty modest. I mean, it probably wouldn't be that distracting. But, so that's the second one. And you do it that 5 times a day. And I believe it's at sunrise. There's a midday, there's an evening, and then there's a sun, like the end of the day when, and I want to say there's a mid-morning, but I forget the exact times. And then the third one is that you are to give money to charity. It's sort of, they will collect money at a mosque, and the money is supposed to go to Muslim charities or to help other people who can't afford to go on a Hajj, which is a religious pilgrimage. And so that's where the other thing is, you're supposed to give money to that. And the fourth pillar is fasting during Ramadan. Most of us are familiar with the fasting. It's where from sunrise to sunset you do not eat anything, and then at sunset you're able to break your fast and you're able to eat and drink and enjoy yourself, but up until that point you're supposed to be fasting, and you're not supposed to take any liquid or anything, and so even brushing your teeth and doing other things would be unacceptable. Now, the month of Ramadan varies because Ramadan, the Muslim calendar, has, I think, 350 or 60 days, whereas the time it takes the sun to go around the earth. The sun's not going around the earth's going around the sun. The time it takes the earth to go around the sun is around 365 days. And so every year Ramadan moves forward a little bit. Now, right now it's in the early fall. I could probably look that up real quick. But but as it gets closer and closer, it'll eventually be in the summer. But I guess right now it's saying it's June 28th through July 28th. So I guess it's in the summer. I guess I was thinking of a few years ago it was more in the fall. But it moves forward. Now, obviously your days are going to be longer and the weather is going to be pretty warm. And so, it is quite of a sacrifice to not eat or drink anything when it's 100 degrees outside and you can't do anything until 9 or 10 o'clock. Now, in certain cases where the days are particularly long, they do make exceptions, and they allow for people, say for example, if you were in Alaska, they would allow you to observe the sunrise and sunset at Mecca versus the time of day there in Alaska, because of the fact that you would have to fast pretty much 24 hours a day. You might only be able, you'd have to get up at 1 in the morning to take a quick drink and before the sun came back up, and the sun would never really go completely down. So in that case, they do allow it. And I don't know, you'd have to ask a local imam what the rules would be, but there are exceptions for that. But in most cases, it is sunrise to sunset at the place you're at. And then the last one is the Hajj. And the Hajj is basically a once-in-a-lifetime, every Muslim who is able should make a trip to Mecca. And basically, typically, they will go to a couple different sites. They'll go to where the idea is that, I believe I told you previously, that they believe that Abraham laid with his handmaid Hagar, and they had a son, Ishmael, and that after Sarah became pregnant with Isaac, she said, I don't want this Ishmael kid around, and she told him to get rid of him. So he put him out into the wilderness, and so she was there with a small child, and she took his foot, and she rubbed in the sand, and up through the sand sprung water, and she was able to drink and food, and she was able to take care of her child, and that he eventually grew up and had 12 children, became the basis of Islam, and that's sort of the way that story goes. Well, that's one of the places they visit. They visit his birthplace. They visit Mecca, a place where the church, and they have this large rock, and they have this huge called the Kaaba, and they have this, I believe that's the name of that, but they have this large stadium basically that people pray, and everybody, male and female, there's no distinction of where you go. They all dress in these significant white robes. You can't tell who's who, and you can't tell what nationality anybody is. You can't tell what gender they are or anything, what sect they are from. Everybody is there, and they all pray facing this large stone at the center, and they go around, and then that's essentially the end of the Hajj, and you're supposed to do that once in your lifetime. Now, as far as other things of significance, the I think that the only other thing of significance I was going to talk about was there is a video called "When the Moors Ruled Spain," and it talks a little bit about that I think you should watch, and it's very informative and very interesting. But essentially, one of the ideas there is that one thing we oftentimes forget is that in the year 600 is around, well, I shouldn't say in the year 600, but around that period, Muhammad began his life and Islam developed, and it began to spread. And for the next few hundred years, Islam was very affirming of science and math and art and other things. And oftentimes we don't see that within Islamic society, perhaps. I mean, perhaps Dubai and some of these other places are very much seen that way. But to a large degree, I think a lot of Westerners don't have that view. They view things like Afghanistan, Iraq, where there's war, and we don't see the science and arts and all that. Well, up until the Crusades, Islam was a very flourishing religion, and it was actually very big into science and math, and it was actually a very flourishing religion. And when the Christians went in, they actually took a lot of the books, and a lot of Aristotle's work was in that society, and they brought it back to the West, and they began to, sort of use those books, use that information, and sort of brought about a bit of a renaissance. Well, it did bring about the Renaissance in the West, because they were developing a lot of that Arabic philosophy and math and science. And a lot of the great thinkers of that time were Arabic. And so I think one thing we oftentimes overlook in the Western tradition is the degree to which we owe a debt of gratitude to the Islamic tradition for a lot of this science, and that Christianity, in the process of the Crusades and other things, also managed to set them back quite a while, and it managed to kind of ransack and ruin a lot of their progress. And so I think that, as far as historically, one has to realize that some of the best medicine was coming out of Islamic traditions up until around the time of the Crusades, 1200s, 1300s. In Spain, it was closer to 1500. But that essentially when that happened, they did ruin that. So, all right, sit back, enjoy, and watch the videos and read and do a good job. Take care.